there's a reason why I dislike end times and talking about things like the end of the world stuff. The reason why I dislike it so much is because people are very dogmatic about it. When they tend to form opinions about it, they tend to stick to it really, really harshly. And it's very difficult for me to tell them something that I don't see that the same way they see it. It becomes very disappointing. All of a sudden we have this moment of disunity. And so I've noticed that people argue about the end times and eschatology and all these things that we know very, very little about the most. I mean, a lot of times the things that people talk and argue about the hardest are those kinds of things. So actually this entire teaching is brought on by something that Eliana asked me about, because I've been talking about the temple and we've been talking about the desecration of the temple. And Eliana came to me after the teaching. She said, well, what about the desecration that we see in Revelation? What about all this stuff? You know, are we going to talk about that? And I said, well, I actually was hoping not to talk about it, but since you brought it up, I guess I have to. So it is an important topic. It should be. I shouldn't want to run away from it, but my tendency is to want to run away from things like that because they raise arguments and they just make people upset, basically. And I'm by nature kind of a peacemaker type of a person, so I hate for people to just argue and get mad at each other, something like that. So on earth as it is in heaven. Let's recap very briefly where we've been and how we got to where we are. We've been studying the role of the temple plays in Jewish spirituality now for a little while. I showed you how this pattern of the temple lays out, it's at the core of the Jewish worship service. Basically everything we do is built around this idea of the temple. I explained that Jerusalem temple is God's chosen dwelling place on earth. That is clearly what the Bible communicates, unequivocally. It is all about God's presence. It is really not the temple is special. It's the fact that God's presence is in the temple. That's what makes it special. It is an exclusive center of divinely instituted sacrificial worship. There is no other place that you can bring sacrifices and offerings to God. And guess what? Sacrifices and offerings is the only way that God actually mandated for him to be worshipped. He didn't give us any other commandments besides those of how he wants to be worshipped. So we got to deal with that. Why? Because he instituted this, and obviously without the temple we can't follow through. So the temple also is God's vehicle of perpetual spiritual renewal. I talked about it, how the rituals of the temple are built in a cyclical way to allow for worshipers to re-engage with God all throughout the year. And multiple times throughout the year, people would come to the temple and reconnect. So if you disconnect from God, you have a mechanism for reconnection, essentially. And so it is a vehicle for spiritual renewal. If you need renewal, the temple becomes that place where it is possible. It's one of its functions. That's what it's built for, essentially. So we also considered many customs that we follow and the rituals that we observe today and how they're tied to the temple. We talked about our corporate prayers that they're built around the times of communal sacrifice at the temple. So again, that pattern is very pervasive. Messiah is also intricately tied to the temple and its worship. I didn't hit all the points of that. It's actually kind of a longer teaching, but I hit at least some of them with you. And so the prophets also paint the Messiah as someone who restores the temple. That's what's really important, kind of what I want you to just see. There's a lot of connections with Messiah and the temple all throughout the ancient texts. But this one particular one that about him being the restorer of the temple, he's the one who restores it, he's the one who enhances it, and he actually leads people in righteous worship. That is an amazing part of the messianic image that we see in the words of the prophets. But as I also mentioned this before, and I will keep mentioning this over and over, this is an important point, not everyone has use for the temple in Jerusalem today. Not everyone that you run into today would say, oh yay, let's rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. There's going to be a lot of people for whom that's not really an option. It would be anticlimactic for them. They don't want it. Why? Because whatever system they built doesn't work with restoring the temple. They're comfy where they are. They don't want to change, and I gave you examples. Like, for example, the Union of Reformed Judaism calls their synagogues temples. There's a reason why they call their synagogues temples. Because they actually believe that their synagogue replaced the temple. And that's why they nix the prayers about restoration of the temple from the Amidah. The very prayers that we pray every single day, they actually nix them from their prayer books. Why? Because why do you pray for restoring something when you already have it right here? You've got it. So that's not very conducive to them. And of course, there's branches of Christianity that also do not necessarily embrace this idea of rebuilding the Jewish temple, because that's counterintuitive to them, because the theology that they have developed actually really goes against the grain if something like that was to happen. They believe that the temple was destroyed and abolished for very good reasons, and never again shall it be. So, but that's their perspective. So, also many New Testament readers today believe that the Jerusalem temple will be restored, but not because it is spiritually beneficial. It will be restored in order to fulfill a very specific prophecy. It will be restored only to be desecrated by Antichrist. That's the purpose of it being rebuilt. Now, some believe it is yet to occur in the future. Some people believe that that's going to happen, that that's our destiny. Our future is to see that happen. Others believe that it has already occurred when the temple was actually destroyed in the year 70 CE. And by the way, believing that does not exclude multiple such or similar desecrations in history. What I want you to realize that it is actually a pattern. The temple being desecrated and destroyed, and predictions and prophecies about the temple being desecrated and destroyed fulfills a pattern. It is not something that just happens once. It's something that happens multiple times throughout history. And those prophecies, they tend to reverberate. They tend to repeat. They tend to be very cyclical. There are a lot of patterns in our life that tend to repeat. So it's like people say we repeat history, right? Or something like that. And this is what I'm talking about. If you look at the history in the big picture, a lot of times it tends to go in a very similar cycle. So it becomes very difficult for us to say, oh, that is the fulfillment of that moment, or this is the fulfillment of that moment, or this is the fulfillment of that moment, because these events just keep happening over and over and over. So I want you to recognize something that I have recognized, hoping that this will help you to see this topic perhaps the way I do, is that this is a pattern. The idea of desecrating the temple is a pattern that occurs and reoccurs. And I wanted to share with you something. First, I wanted to settle this whole issue of Antichrist. I use the word Antichrist, and it's a big, scary word for people. And there's a lot of confusion about it. But I'm going to try to set it straight in under 5 minutes. How about that? Many people believe that Antichrist is a person, some powerful, awful ruler who will come in the future. Okay? If you read some of the Christian fiction books like Left Behind or something like that, definitely that's what you believe. Or that's what they're telling you to believe. Now, John the Apostle believes it's a spirit. Speaking even in plural, when John writes, he doesn't talk about one Antichrist, he talks about multiple Antichrists. What are we talking about? We're talking about something that is completely antithetical to Messiah. Antichristos is a Greek word. It just means something the opposite of Messiah. And so he writes in plural. He says that there's multiple of these. And he writes that in his day, Antichrist already came. That's what he says. Now, you can believe him or you cannot believe him. But that is what he says, and you have to deal with it. So, by the way, John alone describes his qualities. He's the only one in canonical records of any sorts who tells you what Antichrist is or who Antichrist is, depending on whatever you believe. He tells you the qualities of this phenomenon that he is describing. You will not find this terminology, you will not find this word anywhere outside of 1st and 2nd John in the Bible. So if you want to know everything there is to know about Antichrist, just read 1st and 2nd John. They're actually very short letters because there isn't anything outside of that. That's the unique term. So let's glance at this really quickly, and I'll give you, again, just the cream of the crop right there. He writes, 1 John, "Children, it is the last hour. And just as you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists." He says in Greek very clearly, "Poloi antichristoi." You cannot translate this any other way. They have appeared. From this we know that it is the last hour. So John tells us we're living in the last days, and how do we know it? I know Antichrists. Here they are walking around. I'm going to point to them out to you in a crowd. That's what he says. Clearly, in his community, in his time, he's absolutely convinced that multiple Antichrists are about and around. And though he continues to write in 1 John 4:3, "And every spirit does not confess Yeshua is not from God. This is the spirit of Antichrist." So it says, "To pneuma to antichristu, of which you have heard that it is coming, and now it is already in the world." So the spirit, or the Antichrist, or whatever, however you want to take these words, because sometimes he's nebulous. He writes like a prophet does. He says it's already here. It's already in the world. In his day, in the 1st century, he tells us. Now, we have to interpret this. We have to understand it. So either he is, had too much Menashevitz, or he really knows something that we don't know that he's talking about. According to him, there's these deceivers. There's these people who are the opposite of what Messiah is, that are around and about, spreading their things. And in fact, that there's a lot of teaching that talks about deception and misleading people and things like that. And if you're curious to know, just read in 1st and 2nd John, and you will fully understand what this idea of Antichristos that this apostle is trying to put forward. So when I explain this idea of Antichrist in such a simplistic way, people always say, but this cannot be the only place about Antichrist. What about Revelation? Yeah, Revelation is a great point. But Revelation does not use such language. Do you realize that there is no such thing as Antichrist in Revelation? There isn't. There's the beast. There's the beast of the sea. There's the beast of the land. There's the prophet. There's all kinds of things that happen in Revelation, but not what John just described to us. Not that. So one can believe in a specific person being this terrible, awful ruler, powerful person who misleads everyone, or you can totally understand this as a pattern, which is what I propose. Spirit of the Antichrist is another way of saying something that pervades, invades, takes over, manifests itself in a variety of different ways. Okay, that's how I understand that language. You could choose to disagree, that's perfectly fine, and I expect for some of you to disagree with me, that's perfectly normal, but that is what I see. I see a pattern. When I read these letters of John, to me, he's talking about a behavior, a pattern, a manifestation. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about the pattern that I see in history as a student of history, as an observer of these events. Maybe you've heard about these things, maybe you haven't, but allow me to educate you just a little bit. Antiochus IV, known as Antiochus Epiphanes. He is what I call the accomplished desecrator. He actually accomplished the desecration of the temple. So if anyone did it, this guy absolutely did it. He ruled the Seleucid Empire in a year from 175 to 164 BCE. His name itself, Epiphanes, reveals his megalomaniacal claims. He was this maniac, and he declared himself to be the visible manifestation of God named Zeus. Okay, that's why he's called Epiphanes. God manifested himself in him as the ruler of the Seleucid Empire. So in the year 175 BCE, he actually supported a Jewish high priest by name of Jason, and he made special agreements in exchange for their loyalty. He installed his own high priest in Jewish temple, by the way. The guy bought priesthood. He bribed him. So he says, oh yeah, sure, you're the priest now, because you gave me a very nice gift. You can have this position. So he makes these agreements with Jewish leadership, and everything is good. In the year 169 BCE, Antiochus IV attacks and plunders the temple treasury. His armies pass by because Jerusalem is on the way to Egypt. He's getting ready to attack Egypt, and he needs to resupply. So what does he do? Plunders the temple. That temple is filled with gold. And that's what his military needs to keep going. He needs to finance his war, so that's what he does. That's the story that we know so well, the story of Maccabees. So 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 54 says, now on the 15th day of Kislev, in the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege. Okay? It says, Deligma eremosos. This is a sacrilege. This is some sort of a item that they have erected that defiles things. They did this on the altar of burnt offering. This is the book of the Maccabees. It says that this was the year 167 BCE. The temple was desecrated with a pagan idol. Idolatry was happening. Statues of Zeus were brought into the temple. Remember who Zeus is. This guy. So he literally erected his own image. It was the statue of Zeus with his face on it. That's what he put into the temple. So if anybody desecrated the temple, this guy certainly did. So much is actually known about Antiochus. So you can read it. There's a lot of history. There's entire books and books written about him and about this violent opposition that he had to Torah. He clearly promoted lawlessness. If anybody was an anti-Torah, if anybody who was promoted idolatry and actually physically desecrated the temple and follows the pattern that the prophets talk about, this guy is an accomplished desecrator of the temple. But I told you it's a pattern, right? I said this is a pattern, so you know that there's going to be more than one. This is just the beginning. I'm going to give you an attempted desecrator. This guy attempted to desecrate the temple. He didn't complete it. He failed, but he really tried. Caligula, you might have heard of him. He's known as Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Caligula is his nickname. It means literally little boot. Don't ask me. I mean, it's a silly story, but whatever. You can read about it later on. So this guy ruled Roman Empire from 37 to 41 CE. So now we moved into this century now. We moved into this side of the year break. And Caligula declared himself a god and demanded worship throughout his entire empire. You can read about this in Philo, for example. Philo has quite a bit about Caligula. There's a writing called Legato ad Gaium. That's a nice Latin term, but basically means an embassy to Gaius. He sent a letter to the emperor saying, please don't do what you're trying to do. This is going to create so much problems for us. So Philo has this letter. And so he essentially supported Alexandrian anti-Jewish pogroms, converting synagogues into pagan temples. In 38 CE, there was a riot all throughout Alexandria, Egypt. And local population burned synagogues, literally. Alexandria was one of those cities, kind of like New York City, lots of Jews. And people went throughout the whole city, destroying synagogues, burning things, cleansing their city of Jews, essentially. And later on, they took all those buildings and converted them into pagan temples. And by the way, Caligula, he was totally down with that. He's like, yeah, it's not a Jewish city. Let's clean that out. So clearly not on the side of the Jews. And so he did attempt to place his own statue in Jerusalem temple. And that attempt, he actually issued an order to do that, created a crisis that almost nearly fulfilled the pattern of Antiochus. So almost what Antiochus did, he almost achieved that. Josephus in Antiquities wrote this: Gaius ordered Petronius, who was the president of Syria, to make war against the Jews unless they would admit of his statue to be placed in their temple. So he tells a Syrian regiment of troops to come to Jerusalem and to demand that they place a statue of Caligula in the temple. And if they don't, war breaks out. Kill anybody who opposes. Anybody who stops you, you kill them. The emperor said so. You have imperial orders. That was year 40 CE. Year 40. And what happened is they tried to enforce this. Petronius, who was a general, a military general, he got to Jerusalem right around springtime, and a riot broke out in the Jewish community. And people said, oh no, you're not bringing pagan statues in the temple. And so there was this fighting that's happening in the streets. And armed militias started forming. And this is when you have to understand this about Romans. They don't like wars, they don't like riots. They want to keep people peaceful and pacified, so they keep paying taxes. So they said, well, let's just wait. So in springtime, they tried to install the statue. By fall, it's not happening. Of course, by fall, we have holidays coming. I mean, it just keeps swelling. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to place the statue. So the communication goes back to the emperor, say, we can force this, but you know a whole war is going to break out, and then that's going to be on you to commit more troops, because the regiment that we have here is not going to be able to hold these massive group of people. So they wait. And then in January 41, Caligula is assassinated, and his order is abandoned. So guess what? He didn't do it all the way. He intended to do it. He was completely committed to that and to enforcing his law, but he got killed. So it didn't happen. So that's why I say attempted desecrator. He tried it. As you could see, these guys are doing the same thing and in the same way. Just the level of success is what differs. Nero, I call him the beast and the destroyer, because out of these people, he actually achieved something even more so. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. He ruled as a Roman emperor from year 54 to 68. He had targeted persecution of Jews and Gentiles who embraced all Jewish ways. These people were known as Christians back then. And he had this crazy maniac behavior that led many people to see him as the fulfillment of apocalyptic prophecies. People looked at the prophecies in the Jewish Bible and they say, the Bible has to be talking about this guy because he is insane. The kinds of things that he did were completely outrageous. You can read again books on Nero. There's many historians that write in detail stories about this person, and he was completely nuts, let's put it this way. He was very violent, certainly wanted to kill Jews. He had it in for Christians, because you see, I told you this before, it's bad for Jews, but for Christians who are not Jewish is 100 times worse, because here's somebody who's not Jewish, who's following a Jewish religion or believes in the God of Israel, and you are now seen as the betrayer of your own people. When the religion of Rome says this, and you say, I don't believe that, or I'm not going to bow to the emperor, you just put a huge target on yourself. You have become a traitor against your own people. You're a terrible Roman, essentially. You're not patriotic because you're siding with a bunch of bearded shepherds and rebels. These people only make trouble for us. Why would you want to be part of them? So Christians who are not Jewish, okay, Christ followers who didn't come, whose heritage, that was not, their heritage, this was so much more difficult for them. They were persecuted terribly by their own people. And of course they were terribly outnumbered. So here's another fact about Nero that you need to know. The 666 that you read about in Revelation is a gematria code used for his name. So his name, if you spell his name in Hebrew, Neron Caesar, and you realize that in Hebrew letters are numbers and numbers are letters, and you actually start corresponding those letters to numbers, guess what you're going to get to? You're going to get to 666. So that's the big mystery. When you read a phrase and it says, let the reader understand, right? It's like you're being hinted to. And that's what we see in Revelation. So there's this image of the beast being revealed, and his name is 666, and it's a number of a man. He tells you that in Revelation, John. And then he gets to this idea of who that is. And so people knew back then that there was a code in Revelation. It's just later on people didn't know how to use gematria and couldn't connect it together. But earlier on, they knew this. Yes?
So, and Neron Kaiser in Greek is 666. And there's some manuscripts.
It wouldn't work in Greek.
And there's some
Gematria works in Hebrew much better.
No, what I'm saying is his name Neron Kaiser, when you put it into Hebrew letters, is 666. And some of the early manuscripts, there's two that read 616.
Yes.
And that's from Latin, because Latin drops the N on the back, on the end of Neron, right. It makes it Nero, and that is 616. So it's just another confirmation that this was the guy, because there's other early church fathers that made that connection.
People knew who the beast was in Revelation, is what I'm trying to tell you. Jews knew this because there's a hint to his name, and it's coded in through gematria. And again, people who study gematria would know these kinds of secrets. And so if you want to keep it a secret, but you want to say it without saying it out loud, that's what people would do. They put a code in. If you're interested to study that out, you can study this out. But basically, he's the beast or the destroyer, because the kinds of things that he does earns him a title to be seen as that ultimate person of whom the prophecies talk about desecrating the temple. So here's what happened. Around 66 CE, he erected a 120-foot tall bronze statue of himself as the sun god. So this guy also was a very big opinion of himself. He believed he was a sun god. Okay? That's right. Solus Invicticus is what they call him. So he did that. He made plays, big theatrical plays, where he forced people to honor him as a deity, as a part of the play. It was kind of like, oh, we're role playing, it's pretend, but no, it's not really pretend. It's really all about me, and I'm the god you're supposed to worship. It's hilarious how you read the history describes him. But in 66 CE, Nero forced Florus, who was a procurator in Jerusalem at that time, to enter the temple, to raid the treasury and steal 17 talents of gold. Okay, that's a truckload of gold, basically. They took that out of the temple. He did that, and Josephus writes about it in his book War. Again, he did that because emperors need money, so he was running short, and Jews had too much. So this incident basically started the first Jewish revolt, or the first Jewish war against Rome, that ended with the tragic destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 CE. So in 66, they robbed the temple of gold, and that starts a revolution. And that revolution is finally put down. That rebellion is finally put down years later, in year 70. And the final act is the destruction of the temple. So when we talk about the destruction of the temple, I want you to realize that's an end of a war that this guy began by robbing the temple. Now, does that sound familiar? Did we know somebody else who years ago came into Jerusalem and decided to take the money from the temple? You could see why I call this a pattern. So That's, he ended badly too. He committed suicide, but then other people finished the war. He didn't get to see the temple destroyed. He started the war, then he committed suicide, and Titus and Vespasian are the ones who finished it. So, but as far as people were concerned, Nero pretty much topped all his predecessors, because out of all of them, he didn't just rob the temple, he didn't just desecrate it. The troops, because of him, literally have completely destroyed it. Not a stone left upon stone, we say that. It's because of this guy.
So 17 talents is 1,274 pounds.
Thank you.
More than half a ton.
Like I told you, it's a truckload.
$67 million worth of gold.
It's a lot of gold. So what I want you to realize, people always ask, why does the temple have so much gold? Besides the fact that the temple is decorated with gold, which all comes from donations, okay, people donate money so that the temple can be made beautiful. Besides the fact that that happens, people actually in ancient days used the temple as a bank. This is what you don't realize. It's a safe place to hold your money. And people would dedicate certain wealth to God, and they would hold it, and then later on they would redeem that wealth. So it technically belonged to the temple for a while. It's a special arrangement. And then people would redeem it. It's kind of almost like selling your chametz for Pesach and then buying it back. Like, think of it that way. But the temple was the place where it was held. And also the deeds, the records, the land records, they were also held in the temple treasury. And so all the genealogies and things like that, there was a lot of things that were held. So burning the temple meant erasing all of those debts and all those things. And that wreaked havoc on the entire economy. And now all these records are destroyed, all these things are destroyed as well. The burning of the temple is not just about destroying a building. It's about so much more, because people don't fully understand how temple functioned at its institution those days. It was a sort of a central bank, if you want to think of it that way, because of how people did it. The banking system that we have today is much, much more modernized, but that was the ancient version of it. So what I'm hoping by showing you this is that you're seeing a pattern, okay? Because I see a pattern. So when people tell me about these things, I say, this has happened before, and then it has happened again, then it has happened again, and what are the odds that it might happen yet one more time, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 17 times? I have no idea how many more times we will see this pattern occur and reoccur. So when I say that I do believe that the temple was desecrated in the year 70, and that has actually been fulfilled and that has happened, I do believe that's happened. But that's not necessarily the end. What just happened? I just went to sleep. Our screen went to sleep. All right. We're rebooting.
I may be totally off in my mystical mind.
Bring it on, bring it on.
But what I saw in that was man is attempting to be the sun god. We saw that in Egypt with Ra.
Right.
Hashem desecrates that by being total darkness. He puts total darkness.
Right.
So he's in control. We see this, he erects himself as the sun god. And it's sort of a reverse action, and it sounds bad in the sense like he conquered God, and that's
right.
what the Egyptians talk about, carrying the menorah away. But because of the temple not being here, we are in some side of a darkness without the Shekinah. And then when we rebuild the temple, the third temple, we're talking about God's glory coming back and him being there. And we talk about in Revelations that at the end there is no God or is no temple.
Right.
His light is fulfilling the world. And that's why we read Psalm 67 during the counting of the menorahs, that the earth, the people will acknowledge him, and that the earth will fulfill its purpose of acknowledging Hashem. So I don't know if I can put all that together, but that's some of the mystical.
I see how your mind is working. I mean, you just shared it. You make connections. You make semantic connections, which is fine, because that is how we're supposed to interact with these ancient words. We're supposed to connect the dots and create these little lines. It's almost like a person who creates a little mind map, and they're doing it, and your mind does that essentially. So you draw and see certain connections that make total sense. What you shared, by the way, it's logical, but it is mystical, like you said, because you're looking beyond. You're seeing symbolism here.
It's somewhat of an irony in our space, but parts of the Jewish tradition see Jesus as the Antichrist, the anti-Messiah, because of the way it's been presented.
Because of what it has brought for many Jews, because it coincides. You know, the problem with Yeshua is this: he predicts the destruction of the temple before it happens. He actually tells you this is going to happen. In fact, he tells you it's going to happen very soon. And then, unfortunately, people like Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Augustine, and later Thomas Aquinas and people like that, they take it the whole down the line, saying that the reason why the temple was destroyed is because Israel rejected their Messiah. They create that theology. So now think about Jewish people saying, "Oh, is that why it happened?" So like that makes me have really warm, fuzzy feelings towards Jesus. You know, like that's what happened. Like if that's how you see this perspective, you can understand the animosity, you can understand the disagreement, and really sometimes even the anger.
Yeah, I guess my what I'm thinking is more of the anti-Torah approach,
Yeah,
and how in that tradition Jesus is associated with Rome and Armilus, and that idea of Jesus is the anti-Messiah, leading people away from Torah, away from God to a person, away from this temple system. So it's like a reversal.
Right, because what Jewish world has experienced, the Jewish world has experienced Christianity, particularly Roman version of Christianity, after Christianity became its own thing. What they haven't experienced is the Gospels. They actually never read the teachings of Yeshua. They never studied his words. If people did, they would have a very different opinion of that, because there's nothing anti-Torah in his words, not even the least. That's not possible. It's these interpreters later on, they're going to spin it in every way possible you can imagine.
So, like to simplify that would be like they turned the Messiah into the anti-Messiah.
Right. Yeah. They turn. It's a twist. It's a turn. It's an ironic and it's sad irony, but that's what happened.
What's interesting though is if you read, if I'm not mistaken, Augustine, he would say that he has this theology of they're no longer the people of God and everything, or at least not the way they were, but he says something very interesting. He's like, but leave them alone. He basically tells everybody who has lined up to harm them has met with catastrophe. So leave them alone.
Leave the Jews alone.
So there are a lot of church fathers that actually do say, leave them alone, but at the same they kind of put a ban on them. But at the same time, from what I understand, a lot of the persecutions were a lot of local actions, like Augustine said this from the heights that he was at, but things are a bit different around these here parts, and we're going to pursue.
Yeah, there's the official party line, and then there's what people do, and that's always different.
Well, basically too, because of that replacement theology, now that this is no longer needed, they're no longer needed, so they're just going to wander the earth aimlessly with no purpose anymore, because now he's replaced it all.
There's a lot of very, very complicated and very painful history between the communities, and there's probably a time to talk about that. I don't know about it today, because I'm trying to focus on the temple and the connection to the desecration of the temple, destruction of the temple, and what that does, and how there's a pattern. Remember, temple is a pattern, and so is this evil person coming in and completely wreaking havoc and desecrating and destroying that which has been set up by Hashem himself. That's what he gave us. So here's a verse here for you. Luke 21, 20 through 24. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So you see, prophecies like that is what we're talking about. Yeshua is predicting the destruction of Jerusalem. And we just talked about these pieces of history. These pages of history are very real. It did happen according to the predicted pattern. Yeshua indeed warned us of this terrible destruction. And many read his words and believe that it is yet to occur. There are people who say, oh, this has happened and it will happen again. Others believe that it has already occurred. They say, well, we're done. The destruction that the prophets prophesied has happened. Other things that may happen will be different. So as a result, even among followers of Messiah, some wait for the third temple to be rebuilt so that it will be desecrated. And others hope that the next temple will be rebuilt and it will be graced by Messiah's presence right there. So we have disagreements, even within our community. Some people would say, oh yeah, it's going to be rebuilt and then Antichrist is going to come. And I'm like, is that what you think about? Different opinions, and that's okay to disagree. We can disagree on prophecy, we can disagree on details, but we can agree that the temple is a part of God's plan for the last days. It's there. It's unavoidable. What is most important is that we do not depart from what Yeshua believed about the temple and make sure that we understand his words and his teachings about it, because that's the part where people twist that makes me so upset. So I believe this is an area that there's way too many misunderstandings, and since the temple is so central in Jewish spirituality, it really is best for we take time to untangle some of these key teachings. So I do have a little bit of time still to get you into this text that's really important. So when disciples marveled at the temple's beauty, Yeshua said this. This is Matthew 24. Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down. And he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, and the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things happen? So he tells you the whole entire temple was going to be torn down, which is, by the way, a massive complex. I want you to imagine a complex that is the size of more than 10 football fields. And it's made out of solid stone. Some of those stones are as big as this ark. And how are you going to tear this down? It's going to take massive amount of sheer force to pull this apart. And he says, I'll tell you, not a stone will be left upon stone. And they say, tell us, when will this happen? So Yeshua does answer them. But before we look at his words, what I want you to note is that the Master did what he did not say. He did not say that the temple is being destroyed because he was rejected. Did you notice that? He doesn't say that. The ruin simply must come to be. This is what's destined to happen. It has reasons. It has reasons, don't get me wrong. There are exact reasons, except he doesn't tell his disciples, oh, well, these people, they rejected me, and that's why it's all going to get torn apart into pieces. He didn't say that. Again, these are his own words, this is his own teaching about that very topic. So if anybody should have explained it to us, he would have. So in Luke 19, we read about a very similar prediction of temple's destruction. It's Passover time, just before Yeshua is arrested. He cries over Jerusalem, and he says to the city, he's speaking to the city as if the city was alive. He says, you will be destroyed and leveled to the ground. They will not leave you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. So this is Luke 19:44. Now I want you to answer for me a simple question. What in the world did he mean that you will be destroyed because you did not recognize the time of your visitation? What do you think, or what have you heard this phrase, you didn't recognize the time of your visitation, means? Thoughts, ideas? What are the possibilities?
What we heard is that we didn't recognize Yeshua as the Messiah.
Okay.
But we did, and it was others.
Some did, some didn't,
that
but-
rejected, but what it means is that the time, the judgment was at hand, meaning that now is his mercy is running out, and now is the time to repent, for the kingdom is at hand. Now is the time to repent and turn from your ways, and if you don't, you will receive the judgment that has been mercifully holding back. And it still took 40 more years, but that's what it was.
Okay. So what does it mean they did not recognize the time of your visitation. Okay, how else can we understand that?
Okay, again, mystical here.
Bring it on.
I don't want to misconstrue that I am trying to say that Yeshua was God. But the concept of the temple being present is God's presence. And so it's a Song of Song. We didn't recognize His space and time that we could be with Him. We treated it as religiously a compound and not a spiritual place that we connect. So it's like a woman being off of her menstrual cycle. Now we can be with Hashem. We can be with her. This is an intimate statement of connection, and Yeshua's helping us He's the one bringing us to. He's like, go get the lost sheep of Israel.
Right.
Bringing us to Hashem, and they at that point failed to recognize it, and so it's a Song of Song. It's a Song of Songs. He knocked on the door, and they didn't. She didn't answer.
So we had an appointment. We missed it.
Yeah.
But there was 5,000 wanting to make him king right there. We were
Right.
screaming in the streets, Hosanna.
Right. There were thousands of
The
people.
temple
So
records were
obviously
destroyed.
not everyone missed it. Some people did, some people did not, and this is split. But
Well, it's interesting because like for the last 2,000 years, Judaism has prayed prayers about like when the Shekhinah returns and when there would be a temple. It's like, well, when you had a temple, you were setting up the money changers, and many of you were working in cahoots with the Romans.
right.
And others of you were Hellenizing for this new cosmopolitan lifestyle. And others still were, I mean, you all had your own, I guess, camps to defend and interests
Right.
that you set up. And it's like, you had right there what later generations of you would pray for. And this so-called time of visitation with Hashem, it was just nothing.
It's a pattern. Think of it this way. We come to the very edge of the borders of the land of Israel, the promised land. You can come in right now and possess it. Oh no, the people are on the other side. They're big, they're huge, we can't do it. So now the whole entire generation dies out in the wilderness. And their children get to inherit the land. So sometimes there's a generational turnover because the previous generation has failed. And we recognize that, and people can fail, and they can fail miserably. That's happened in our past again. So we can recognize that.
So why would a Jew living under Rome violently hate another fellow Jew who claimed to be the Messiah? Even if deep down you doubt that he's the one, why not still hope? Maybe not that man, maybe the next man. That claimant was crushed by Rome, but what about this one? Under oppression, hope isn't naive, it's survival. Could some be skeptical after a few disappointments? Sure, some skepticism is logical. But murderous scheming to remove a potential deliverer, why?
Because you don't want your whole entire system upset. Remember, the people who wanted to remove Yeshua from his place
Not
were the
the
people
people.
who had a lot to lose.
Were the
Not the
rulers
common
over the
people. The
people.
rulers, yeah.
Not the people.
Yeah, the people in power, people in charge, they had interests to protect that they wanted to do. And that's the irony of it. That's the difficult part. Aaron? Yeah.
Question. So, I'm not trying to be legalistic about this, but one stone upon another.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to Jerusalem and I've seen many stones stacked upon each other still, and they've been sitting there for 2,000 years. So
Yeah.
how do we wrestle with that when the stones have not been, they're there still stacked together?
Sure. I got your question. So my point always being, whenever it comes to prophecy, I'm not always the person who has to have everything fulfilled in exactly most literal way, because I realize how language is. Now, have you seen the buildings of the temple when you visited Jerusalem? You've seen the stones stacked that
Base.
hold
It's
up
basically the base
the
of it.
mountain.
Yeah.
You've seen the foundation that holds up the mountain, but have you seen any walls of the actual temple? No.
Okay.
You wouldn't. You wouldn't see anything that was above ground was leveled. The only thing that you see is what's below the ground level, essentially. because that means destroying the earth and now excavating things. So those are the only things that actually still stand. But everything else pretty much has been leveled. So it is actually a pretty accurate description of that. But what I want you guys to zero in on is this problematic word, the time of your visitation. You did not recognize the time of your visitation. People take this verse and they say, oh, you didn't recognize your Messiah. Your Messiah came, you didn't recognize him, and now that's what you get. You get the destruction of the temple. People assume that the word visitation means coming, as in visit, and explain that the temple was destroyed because the Messiah was not recognized. But I want you to know that the word visitation is a very archaic English word that people basically grossly misconstrue today. And the problem is English. Greek is perfectly clear. It's the English that will confuse you all day long, because that word visitation sounds like a visit. So I'm going to play a little game with you and show you something in just a minute. So the word does not actually mean a visit of someone's coming. The word episkopos means a guardian or a supervisor in Greek. In 1 Timothy 3:1, Paul writes, if a man aspires to be an episkopos, sometimes translated as bishop, it's a good thing he desires. So what is an episkopos? A guardian. Thus, the feminine word episkope, which is what this word is that we keep looking at, it can be translated as watching over, or supervision, or judgment, or inspection, or examining. It's an action performed by someone who is a guardian or an overseer. So the word visitation is what we are looking at, and that's where the confusion is. The Greek is very clear. Here's a few versions for you, and I want you to see how differently they're going to translate this particular passage. Sometimes Hebrew helps a little bit more, sometimes Greek. Here's one. Numbers 16:29. This is a story of Korah, if you know. Okay, so Moses says, I have God's authority. If these people die natural death, then I'm nobody. If something unusual, really unusual, happens to these people and they go in a very unnatural way, you know Hashem's got my back. That's what he says. So he says, if these men die a common death, or if they be visited after visitation of old men, then the Lord hath not sent me. So this is King James Version. Very old English. Visited after visitation of all men. Hear that? See that phrase? That word visited. If these men, look, our Revised Standard Version, slightly different, it says, if these men die common death of all men, or if they're visited by the fate of all men, so you see the second word visitation went away now, then the Lord has not sent me. You get to NIV, a much more modern translation. It says, if these men die natural death and suffer the fate of all mankind, do you see how the text changes? Then the Lord has not sent me. But you're still catching, the meaning has not changed at all. And then look at the NLT. This is New Living Translation. It says, if these men die natural death, or if nothing unusual happens, then the Lord has not sent me. Now, each one of these translations are actually pretty accurate. They all retain the same exact meaning. If nothing unusual happens to these people, then God is not with me. That's just what Moshe says. And Hebrew will help you to see what this word visitation really is. Okay, and the word is right here. It says, Upekudat kol ha'adam yipaked. So, it says, if these people will not die, the natural, like all kol ha'adam, yamutun, sorry, here it says die, okay? Ele is this. It says, Upekudat kol ha'adam yipaked, which is that phrase that King James translated as visited after the visitation of all men. That's a very literal translation. So what do you think is this pekudah means? Because the word that we keep digging into, the word for visitation, what does it mean? Pekudim means precepts, directions, regulations in Hebrew. Pekudah means an appointment, a punishment, assignment, custody, oversight. The verb pakad means to see, to inspect, and to verify if something is there or is not there. It is used about 81 times in the book of Numbers, in chapters 1 through 4, which all describe the census of the tribes. Where you're counting people, and you're seeing what is there and what isn't there. You're trying to make sense of the numbers. In Isaiah 24:22 says, they will be gathered together like prisoners in a dungeon, and they will be confined in prison after many days. It says, Merov yamim yipakdu. They will be punished. Does it say they will be visited? As in, someone comes to visit the prison? It says, no, they will be punished. So that word pekudah has something to do with the counting. In Hebrew, this is the term that really has to do with inspection of some sort. It's the time of totaling things up, essentially. Seeing what is and seeing what isn't, right? That's what we're talking about. And that is the term that is translated into Greek as episkope, which is the archaic English words, puts it down as visitation. It really means oversight, inspection, judgment, punishment, that which was appointed. That's what happens, essentially. It's a very difficult to translate Hebrew word because there's really not one English that fits it, but that's the idea. Yes, Lloyd?
So, when, I can't remember how you say it, Tishrus, whatever it was, Ephesus,
Yes.
he appointed Jason as the high priest.
Right.
Which was not in the line of Aaron, correct?
Yeah.
From that point on, was all the high priests appointed?
Yeah, the high priests were bought for money at that time, yeah.
Okay.
The priesthood was so corrupted. Once Rome got involved, the entire system of the temple became increasingly more corrupted with every generation, to the point where priesthood was for sale. Literally, you could bribe the Romans to give you the job.
And they wouldn't be from the line of Aaron or Levi?
They would try to keep that up by marrying into the family. There were people who were not descendants of Aaron who would marry somebody who is, so they have some sort of a loose claim to priesthood. But that's not how Aaronic priesthood works. You have to be literally a descendant. So people did all kinds of funny business and got away with it. Why? Because money, power.
And then in 37 CE, then Herod destroyed the records, the genealogical records, because he was an Edomite. And that's why I believe that there's a distinction in the New Testament between Israel and the Jews.
Right.
Because the people narrating the story are Jews and they're Pharisees. And so I believe there is a distinction between actual native-born Jews who are Israel and the Jews who are doing these things. And
The word the Jews also means Judeans, people who live in Judea. Like Georgians live in Georgia. Jews live in Judea.
This is great. It's interesting too that it coincides with a later idea, or at least an idea shared later. The Ramchal breaks down the redemption and all the time before it into two categories. Zahira is the actual redemption, the moment when it kind of like moves into the redemption. All the time before is Pekudah. So this actually lines up with that.
Yeah.
You recognize this window of opportunity,
Yeah.
so to speak.
It is a window of opportunity. It's like, think of it I think of it as an inspection at that time of discovery. Let's say we're going to figure out what's what, or what's supposed to happen here. How is this all going to work out? Let's see what happens, essentially. And so the translations are tricky because we have to put down a concrete word, but text is in that sense it's flexible because of how the language works. So coming back to that verse, because you didn't recognize the time of what? Yeshua said Jerusalem did not recognize the hour of her examining or her judgment. That's what he meant by visitation, right? Remember, this was Pesach, and just at Pesach is when the lambs are being examined, if they're fit for the altar or they're not fit for the altar. The word examination is all in the context of that particular time. If you read the Gospels just as they are, and you ignore the cultural and historical context that's there, then you don't see it. But when you realize, why does the writer say that it was Pesach when he said this? And then he uses Pesach-type language to say, okay, this is the moment of Pikudah. This is the moment of discovery. Are you worthy or are you not? Are you fit or are you not fit? And he says, he cried over Jerusalem because you didn't recognize that moment. This was your chance. You didn't recognize it. So, that's that. You could see how people put the spin on that verse in a slightly different way. So Yeshua explained that after this, the first teachers will come, then there will be wars and rumors of wars, there will be famines, earthquakes. His disciples will be persecuted because of him. Many will fall away. Lawlessness will increase, he says. People will become cold. And then verses 13 and 14 says, but the one who endures to the end, that one will be saved. This is good news of the kingdom shall be proclaimed in the whole world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. So he actually answered his disciples' question. They said, when will this happen? And he gave us this long answer. And it says, all these things are going to happen, and then the end will come.
I don't know if this is the right idea, but is the inspection to determine if it's Ben Yosef that shows up or Ben David?
Well, who shows up is who shows up. Your job is to recognize.
You know what I mean, in terms
Yeah.
of which Messiah shows up. The one that...
The inspection is of the people. Are the people ready? So you know what tradition says. Tradition says that if people are meritorious, he will come as Ben David. And if people are not, he will come as Ben Yosef. You know, that's the idea. If people are worthy, then the final deliverance is here. If people are not worthy, then we go for another loop. And we've missed the window of opportunity. And there's going to be some other time until that redemption makes a full circle. I mean, Jewish tradition sees it that way as well. So hopefully that makes sense. So there's a lot of things that's supposed to happen. And it says, and then the end will come. So they asked him about the end. He gave them the answer about the end. But all of that is precipitated by what? The temple will be destroyed, and a stone will be left upon stone, and all these things will happen. But even that, he says, is not the end. Then the good news will be proclaimed all over the world to all the nations, and then the end will come. So guess where we are right now? We're still in the witnessing to the nations stage. That has not been completed apparently, because obviously the end is not here just yet, right? So we still have a little bit of time. However much time, we don't know, which is why I always tell you that there's an urgency to this idea. This moment can end. We don't know when this wraps up. So let me wrap this up. Yeshua warned his disciples, therefore, when you see abomination of desolation, okay, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. So there you go. Yeshua tells you the temple will be destroyed, but I'm going to tell you a preview right now. When you see the abomination of desolation, and people who read Daniel would know what that means, when you see that, run. That's what he says, run. So first of all, Yeshua recognizes that Daniel describes someone or something as abomination. And you have to read Daniel to fully understand what he's talking about. And second of all, his disciples will see. His disciples will see the abomination spoken in Daniel. Meaning they will re-experience something that was clearly Antiochus has already fulfilled those things. But he says, you will see this again. When you do see them in the holy place, run. Run for the hills, run for the mountains. That's what he tells them. So we know that generation was supposed to see the fulfillment of the verses of Daniel again. That's what he tells them. This is why I talk about it being the pattern. He continues, the text just keeps going. Whoever's on the housetop must not go down to get things out of his house, and whoever's in the field must not turn back to get his cloak, But woe to those women who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. Moreover, pray that when you flee, it will not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. Now, do you catch on that this is all not 21st century language? Because when people would go out to the field, they would strip down to their undies essentially and work in the field that way because clothes was very expensive. And then they get back from the field, they put their clothes back. So he tells them, if you're working in your underwear and this happens, run. Do not go back for your clothes. Not worth it. Not worth it. That's what he tells you. So the language is like, he says it will be a difficult time. Why are you not supposed to flee in the winter? Because in those days there are no roads. And guess what? It gets very soggy in the winter. Why? Because the entire Galilee, it rains. And the ground is completely saturated with the water in the wintertime. And now you can't get through. And there are no roads. There are no asphalt roads. There are no drains. There's no runoff because there's nowhere for it to run off to. And he says, and pray that it's not on the Sabbath. Why? Because everything is shut down on the Sabbath. And you got to run and you got to go. And what are going to happen? How are you going to find a way to get away?
Well,
He says, for then there will be a great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, not even again. And if those days had not been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of elect, those days will be cut short. So apparently these people who are undergoing through this terrible time, they are being saved because God is cutting short their suffering, the destruction.
What's interesting also in that formulation is that you have this idea that these righteous are atoning for the world, which, you know, so it's not just one person who atones for the world in a more expansive. So in that sense, I guess perhaps the Catholics sort of have something as far as, no, I mean, I'm not, Satmars and other people believe in the Rebbe, and the Rebbe will atone for it, but that is interesting.
The idea of vicariously sharing through your suffering the benefit with other people is not a new idea. It's spread out throughout all religions,
I didn't bring it up when you had the slide earlier about the time of the Gentiles.
Right.
It seems that's also cast forward as like the time the Gentiles can hear the gospel or something. But it would seem in this line that the time of the Gentiles being fulfilled would be the time of the oppressive nations over Israel will be removed and Israel's sovereign again.
And so he tells them, you run because the destruction is coming, the temple is going to be destroyed, there's going to be persecution, people are going to be slaughtered, literally. So he tells them, run away and pray that it's not on Shabbat, because that's going to make your running very difficult. You know, Unirail is not working in Jerusalem, so, you know. Anyway. All right, I run out of time. I'm going to stop right here because I keep going. I wanted to just say that this, you know, just kind of wrap this up. I wanted you to see the teaching in Matthew. I wanted you to see the gospel teaching that explains where Yeshua says the temple will be destroyed, the temple will be desolated, desolation will occur, it will be desecrated, and all of this essentially has happened before, and it is happening, it will going to happen shortly after, because he tells his disciples, watch out and run. And perhaps later on, again, we don't know, because what I showed you before, that this is a pattern. Is it possible that the temple will be restored and there will be yet another desecration? Absolutely. I hope not. I hope that the cycle can be done and this next temple is the one in which Messiah comes and all things are restored. But I can't say that to you with 100% confidence, because I can't unsee the pattern and I can't ignore it. So these things, but there are many people who are convinced, and they will die on that hill telling you that the next temple is going to be desecrated by Antichrist and all that kind of stuff. And that's just one way of looking at it. So if you happen to be in that camp, that's fine. We can disagree on these details. What's important is the big picture that we can agree on, okay? So we'll keep studying the temple, understanding its role and importance, whether it be end times or other things, and I'll get to perhaps other passages as well. Okay, but for today, we totally ran out of time. Okay, thank you.